Or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon, California. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show in our 16th year. We've got a great show for you today. I got to tell you, this show we're doing today is so important to people that may or may not know if they have an asbestos problem. And we were so lucky to find, I'm telling you, this is the top attorney in the country when it comes to asbestos legal claims and mesothelioma. Let me welcome a guy that I love doing the show with, attorney Michael Mandelbrot. Good afternoon, Michael.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for the very, very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. Great to see you.
You deserve it. You know, like some of the shows I do, I have to think about, God, what if the expert can't answer a question? With you, because we don't rehearse it at all. With you, I know that you're not going to have any problems at all answering the questions. Michael's got one of our fewest shows that we do for the entire 50 minutes. And we started off in the Northern California area. We moved it to California. Now we just do it on a national basis. And we repeat the show the following week. So it's one of the few shows that we do that with. You hear all these claims on TV. You're going to get the God's gospel truth on our show. Michael, tell everybody, because I'm seeing we're always getting new people tuning into the show. Tell people about your firm.
Sure. Well, I'm sure everyone out there sees the commercials on TV. Mesothelioma, call this number. If you have mesothelioma or lung cancer, call this number. Well, in essence, that is what I do. I represent victims of asbestos-related diseases. And for those out there who don't know, mesothelioma is a cancer caused only by exposure to asbestos. Other diseases caused by exposure to asbestos include lung cancer, a very severe breathing disease known as asbestosis, and then various other cancers as well, laryngeal and colorectal cancer, can also be caused by exposures to asbestos. So I represent victims of asbestos-related diseases. People who are exposed to asbestos maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but now they've either developed an asbestos disease or, unfortunately, they've passed away from an asbestos disease, like lung cancer, and their family has contacted me to represent them in a wrongful death action. So I represent victims of asbestos diseases, mesothelioma being one of those.
Well, I noticed, Michael, that we got a lot of letters about people writing, what if, a loved one passes away from this, what, and I'm going to have this question for you in the second half of the show, but it seems like a lot of people are asking questions about loved ones who they think have maybe passed away from this asbestos cancer.
That is one of the very unfortunate parts of our practice, is that we are dealing with something that is a very serious disease. Mesothelioma is a terminal disease. So when we represent somebody with mesothelioma, typically their life expectancy is, say, 3 months to a year max. Some people do live longer than that. But I hate to say it, in essence, it is a death sentence. So oftentimes when somebody is diagnosed, they're struggling with the disease and treatment, and they're not worried about a case. But once they pass away, the family, the spouse, the children, or any of them may contact us and ask for assistance. And typically we can help them. Obviously, we want to be contacted as quickly as possible after somebody passes away. In cases where we may suspect it is mesothelioma, we will do an autopsy, a very specific autopsy of the chest cavity, not the entire body, but the chest cavity, because we'd like to confirm that mesothelioma. But even if it's 6 months after somebody passes away, that still is, enough time for us to assist them. What we run into is what's known as, it's a legal term, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard out there, the statute of limitations, which limits the amount of time in which we can file a case or claims for somebody. And every state is different. We represent people all over the country. California, for example, if you're going to file a lawsuit on behalf of an asbestos victim, that lawsuit needs to be filed within 1 year of the date of death. Other states have, and I'm looking over my shoulder because I have some states listed, like Missouri, for example, is 5 years. Most of the trust fund claims that we have, that we file, they have a 3 years from diagnosis, and some of them 3 years from date of death. So wrongful death cases are a major part of our practice. It's a very, very unfortunate thing, but it's something that we become accustomed to because we're dealing with people who do have terminal diseases.
Hey, Michael, how come after all this time there isn't any better treatment for asbestos?
That's a great question, and maybe AI will come up with a solution. And I'm not saying they're related, but it's like Lou Gehrig's disease, for example. We're now what, 60, 70, 80 years since Lou Gehrig passed away, and there's really been, not that I'm aware of, very few advances on the treatment for that disease. With mesothelioma, there is a variety of experimental treatments which clients have had some success with. I have a client who I've mentioned in previous podcasts, Vito Mirabile, who is still alive. We are 4 years in. He's involved in experimental chemo. What I am hoping is that maybe with the development of AI and its use for finding cures to these diseases, maybe there is something on the horizon. But at this point, it is, I don't want to say analogous to ALS in that there just really hasn't been tremendous advances. The treatment that is typically represented for people with mesothelioma is a chemotherapy and radiation that has a combo that has typically shown some success. And, the success might be advances life 6 to 18 months. It's not like it is a cure. Similar to, in a lot of ways, lung cancer. While the treatment has gotten much better for lung cancer over the years, in the ability to, for example, resect or surgically remove tumors, While these things, there may have been advances, still we don't have any cure for lung cancer. Same sort of thing. And it's just unfortunate. I will say real quick, the non-cancerous disease where we represent people, asbestosis, there's no cure for that either. There's various breathing treatments that they give people in oxygen, but think of it like a thick spider web growing around your lung. Not a cancerous one that's going to spread, but a thick spider web that is slowly suffocating your lung. And that, that is what it's like for these people. And there's no treatment for that either. How do you remove asbestos, a fiber, a mineral that's so fine? And there's, for a lot of these people, they may have thousands of fibers in their lung tissue. How do you remove it? You don't.
Hey, Michael, one of the things I want to get across to people are, because as you were saying about all the commercials you see you're inundated by, it is so important that just because someone has a national commercial, I've learned from Michael now that, you can just put a sign up and say you specialize in this area. Michael, this is basically the only area that you practice in.
And yes, and I'm sort of glad you mentioned that, because I will tell people out there that probably 90% of the ads that you see out there from people are in essence investors in mesothelioma cases. They look at these mesothelioma clients as widgets. They just want to sign up as many as they can and send them to lawyers like me and other lawyers around the country. We actually, assist these people. We understand the disease, the exposures, the products. They don't know any of these things. But you see their ads constantly because they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to advertise. Go with somebody who's experienced. And they'll all say we've recovered millions, hundreds of millions.
Right.
I would recommend, obviously myself, but a smaller firm. Go with a smaller firm, someone who's going to treat you like an individual, like part of the family, not like a widget. And that's what you're going to get with a big firm. And yes, to answer your question, sorry for the long answer, this is all we do. This is all we do. These other firms, I'm not saying they do car act, but they do other mass tort cases and pharmaceutical cases and tobacco cases. And, this is it. This is what we specialize in, period. I mean, the name of my office is the Asbestos Legal Center. That's what we, that's our name.
And Michael, you are never what I call braggadocious, so I have to do it for you. But you deal with a person who's not going to live long, and you've got family members out there who've never been through anything like this before. And it's so important, Michael, you understand what these people are going through. So the communications are so much more valuable.
They really are. And, the one thing that you also didn't mention is, even though I am a lawyer, I essentially grew up in the inner city. And I think that is a big part of why I am very effective at representing these individuals, because, not only are they very sick, they're dying, their families are very concerned, but 90% of them are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. They're blue-collar workers who don't have a lot of money for lawyers. Most of them have never dealt with lawyers, and they don't like lawyers, even the name lawyers, because all they can think of is bills coming in the mail. And that's why I tell clients, and I probably overstated, but I haven't sent out a bill in 30 years. And, and I never will. I appreciate that. And, having had to hire lawyers, it really disturbs me how these lawyers bill every single minute, every second, every email, every bit of research, every bit of time, because they've got to make their hours. I want to help these people, and if I help these people, my office will be successful. And so I've got skin in the game in every case. We don't charge clients. Yeah, we don't charge clients a penny. The only way we make money is a percentage of the settlements, typically 1/3, which is also the lowest in the country. Other firms, like the mesothelioma firms you see on TV, they take 40% or 45%. No, more of that money needs to go to the clients, the families, the people who need it. And I also understand that it is usually the breadwinner in the family who's sick. Unfortunately, it strikes male. Female, don't get me wrong, we see a lot of females who are sick. I took in one yesterday who I think has a really good case. But it's usually the male, the breadwinner, the blue-collar worker who supported his family for 20, 30, 40 years, and now they're wondering, is he going to be here in 6 months or a year? And how is our family either going to pay our mortgage or our rent or buy our food? And, being able to comfort these families and let them know things are going to be okay, I do think that's a big part of my effectiveness in working with these clients. Where other lawyers, I don't think they've got that altruism or that passion about helping these people like I do. Most of them just want the cancer cases because, hey, we make the most money. And these are lawyers in my field who I know well. That's not me. I literally 20 minutes ago an asbestosis case called, and I know every other firm in the country would have said, sorry, we only help mesothelioma. We only help lung cancer. So what? I only make maybe a few $1,000s on his case, maybe 5,000. Who knows? Not a lot. Doesn't justify all the work, but to that client, that money means something. And I know that. That gives them some comfort, some security as they're dealing with their disease. And that's, very important to them, and hopefully eases their family as well.
Michael, you do. It's labor intensive and you don't see a dime right away. There is so much work that you have to do before your client sees the first dime. And I got to tell you, your heart is really, when you just handle, asbestos or mesothelioma cases, your heart's got to really be in it because you do so much work before you realize your first time.
Yeah, and it's usually at least a year, at least, because it takes time to get their medical records, takes time to have them reviewed by an expert. Then we've got to put the whole file together in order to file claims or a case. Then you file the case or the claims, and then you have to wait for them to be reviewed and evaluated. And there's a lot of timing involved. And then maybe they don't pass that claim originally, and it comes back, and then it's got to be re-reviewed. And then the client, even when we do pass a claim, it's not like they send us money. We've got to send the client the release. The client has to properly sign and execute the release. We've got to get it back to the party who we settled with. And then we still got to wait for the settlement. So,
right.
I was thinking when you were first asking the question, it's about a year, but it's more like 18 months. It's more like 18 months before we even see a penny on these cases. And I didn't realize it was so long, but yeah, it is.
Listen, this is going to kind of lead in to our first question of the day from Holly in Metairie. Oh, that's Rebels part of the country. She wants to know, how long should the entire legal process take? And you're saying, I guess, really about 18 months.
Well, that's to start seeing money. And unfortunately, the way it works is that we don't get one big settlement at a time, since there's so many different asbestos companies that we get money from. Different names you may have heard of: Johns Manville, Owens Corning. Yeah. These are some of the bigger ones. There's literally 50 or 60 different companies. Each trust fund claim we file takes a different amount of time to review. Some take longer than others. However, I will say this: the court system, especially in California and a lot of other states as well, are set up to expedite mesothelioma cases, because these people typically have 6 months to live. Right. And the goal is to give them the opportunity to see the courtroom, to see a jury, to get their case to trial. And if somebody's going to expire presumably within 6 months, that 18 months figure doesn't work. Because they'll be long gone by the 18-month mark. So thankfully, mesothelioma cases can be advanced so that those cases sort of jump to the front of the line. They're in the front of the line, even if a case was filed 6 months earlier, 9 months earlier, a year earlier, you can jump a mesothelioma case to the front of the line. We've had mesothelioma cases from start to finish because they move so quickly, 9 months to a year. And in these cases, that's most of the settlements, and millions of dollars. Those cases, the living mesothelioma cases, are a whole different ballgame. And again, that's why you see ads primarily for those cases vis-a-vis the others, because it's also quicker money. Once you file that case, when it's a mesothelioma case and the case is going to go to trial maybe in 6-7 months, these defendants want to settle. They don't want you to go to trial and ring the bell against them. When you file an asbestosis case that isn't, say, going to trial for 18 months, there's no incentive for the other side to settle, at least within that 18 months. So generally, to answer the question, generally 3 years, we'll say. Mesothelioma, 9 months to 15 months. And both of these with a caveat. We've never closed a case in our in my 30 years. And the reason we don't close cases is because part of the money that we get for asbestos victims are from trust funds. These are trust funds that are set up to pay victims for the next 20, 30 years. And every couple years, they evaluate these trust funds and determine, do they have enough money left to pay victims for the next 20 or 30 years? And if those trust funds do not have enough money to pay victims, then they pay everybody going forward far less money than they have in the past to ensure that they can pay claims for 20 or 30 more years. However, if they evaluate that trust fund every couple years and that fund has $100 million more than they anticipated, there may be a claim or a case that I had passed 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 years ago with a trust fund that gets awarded more money 5, 6, 7 years later. It's rare, but once every couple years, it does happen. So, for example, this year, the AP Green Trust raised the amount of money that it was paying each of my clients. Now, it wasn't a lot of money, but there were maybe 380 clients that got checks for $450. because each one of them got an additional amount of money. And that, I'm just throwing out that amount as an example. But if it's a mesothelioma case, that may be about $50,000 basically out of the blue, 6, 7, 8 years later. If I close that case and they award more money, I'd have to send it back because they're no longer my clients. And so we really never close any cases, but really you can think maybe a 3-year estimate on the one hand or a 1-year estimate on the mesothelioma, where lung cancer probably right in between.
Here's a text we got in from Connor in San Diego. What are the typical steps taken after a patient signs on with your law firm?
I think I know who Connor is, by the way. I may know that Connor. And if it is, the first thing, once we retain a client, the first thing is obtaining and confirming the mesothelioma, the pathology, by getting the pathology report. That's the absolute confirmation that somebody has mesothelioma. It's a 1-page report. If you get that report, it's game on from that point. So the next step is investigation to determine who you are going to sue and who are you going to file claims against. That involves a detailed interview of your client to determine all of the places he worked, he lived, whether or not any of his family members, when they were living in the family home with him, worked with asbestos, and then maybe talk to him about asbestos products or products that maybe he didn't know contained asbestos. Brakes, for example, Johnson & Johnson's baby powder. Maybe he's a physician or something. Maybe they were a nurse. So, to talk to them and investigate the universe of all the exposures to asbestos they may have had during their lifetime. At that point, you're ready to file a complaint. Of course, you want to file that complaint for the client in the jurisdiction where, one, it's not going to get removed. Like, for example, if somebody has no exposure during their lifetime in California and was never exposed to a California defendant and spent almost their entire life in New York, I can't file that case in California, or that case is going to be removed for no jurisdiction or dismissed. So you find the most valuable jurisdiction you can file that case, and you file that case, and from that point, it's all systems go, targeting both the solvent defendants as well as defendants who have set up these trust funds, as we call them, the bankrupt defendants. But as we know, these trust funds have $30 billion in them, so they're very valuable as well. So you're strategically looking at every possible resource to get compensation for your dying client, and at the same time evaluating the bankruptcy claims. And the next step, start talking to defendants who you've negotiated with in the past in similar cases, in hopes you can settle the case early, to settle with those defendants early, to put money in your client's pockets. You also got to start lining up your experts. You view every case as if it were going to trial. So you have experts who are going to be testifying at trial, saying it's mesothelioma, saying that the defendant knew asbestos was hazardous, but either didn't put a proper warning on their product or just didn't say anything at all. But you need an expert, a state-of-the-art expert, to know that. So obviously medical experts as well. And there's the client deposition, which is the most critical part of the case. That's where your client gets to tell his story, all about his life, how he was exposed to asbestos, where he was exposed, about the disease, how the disease has affected his life. We take the deposition, and then you just get ready for trial. But once the deposition is done, since the deposition, we view it as if it is going to be shown to a jury, because we don't know if that client will make it to trial. So those depositions are videotaped. Once the deposition is done, it's all pointed towards settling with defendants and getting ready for trial.
Seems like, with your clients not lasting, not being around for long, that deposition is so important to get done, right?
It is, and it's funny you mention that. When I started my career, I worked at one of these big firms, and literally every other week I was being sent somewhere around the country, because realize these depositions, which we videotape, and as we call them, a videotape trial deposition or a trial preservation deposition. Those are the terms that we use. Do you think a client with mesothelioma can travel to our office in order to do? Of course not.
No.
I cannot tell you how many homes I have been in with 15 or 20 different lawyers on the other side in the middle of Kentucky, Indiana, Washington, with these clients, all of these different states, because these clients can't travel. We've got to do the travel. When I say the deposition, now maybe some of the defense lawyers with today's technology do go by Zoom, but when we represent the client, we've got to go where they are. My co-counsel was a guy who worked in San Francisco, but he happened to be from Ireland and moved back to Ireland, who had mesothelioma. Not a bad trip for him, other than he had to take the deposition of a dying client, but he had to go to Ireland a couple months back. And so there's a lot of travel involved. The depositions are key, but we've got to make those as easy as possible on the client so we get the best testimony. So we might be in the middle of an 800 square foot house without air conditioning in Indiana, or maybe a Holiday Inn conference room, or a Ramada, whatever is the closest to their house. And I would often have to pick them up in the morning. Like, I'd stay at the Ramada. I'd have to go pick them up and then drive them to the Ramada, either wheel them or walk them in if their home wasn't suitable for a depot, and then bring them back home. And so, yeah, those depositions, looking back, I think they are, without question, the most important part of the case.
Yeah, we've been doing this show almost 3 years, and we get so many letters now on your show. I got to tell you that this question here, which is from Norm in Baltimore, this is the first time I've heard this question before. He wants to know, how does bankruptcy trust play into the legal process? At what point are they pursued? Never heard that question, Michael.
Well, that is a great question by Norm. Okay. And I will say this, and because think about this, when a client, say, has mesothelioma, and you suing all of these companies who are solvent, you are saying that each one of them is in part responsible for the individual's mesothelioma. And for that same client, if you are filing all of these trust fund claims, which are separate, you are also saying all of those companies are in part responsible for exposure, are in part responsible for exposing that person to asbestos. So what ends up happening, or say 20 years ago, let's just say 20 years ago, what ended up happening was you would file both at the same time. You would file the lawsuit and file the bankruptcy claims. But what lawyers on my side, not me, started realizing was, hey, when you're suing all these companies and saying they're responsible, the first thing they're doing is coming in and saying, hey, we're not responsible. All those bankrupt companies who you've already filed claims and said they're responsible, and they would go in front of a jury and say, wait a minute, we're not responsible. They filed 15 bankruptcy claims against these bankrupt companies saying they're responsible. How can they say we're responsible? And it was a very effective defense for the defendants, because they could point the finger at these bankrupt companies or these bankrupt trust funds. So what the lawyers who handle, the big lawyers in my field, and it's a practice that I am against, they file the lawsuit against the solvent companies, and they say, you're 100% responsible, and we're not filing bankruptcy claims. Okay? It's not the bankrupt companies, and you can't point to them because we're not filing any bankruptcy claims.
Right.
Well, lo and behold, those same mesothelioma lawyers who say that to the defendants also control and are fiduciaries or trustees over these trust funds. And the one thing that they have done is kept the trust fund claims filings confidential from defendants. So even if these solvent defendants ask, have you filed any bankruptcy claims? They say, it's all confidential information and you can't get it and we're not telling you. When really, if they haven't, they're about to file with every single trust fund. So it's a real tough question to answer. Strategically, to get the best outcome for your client, you sue all the solvent companies and go after them. If they ask you what bankruptcy claims you are filing, my attitude is you have to be honest with them and tell them, hey, we are filing these claims. You don't want to deceive them. You don't want to lie to them. And you don't want it to come back to the judge that, hey, you're concealing these bankruptcy claims. But these other lawyers take the other position that, hey, we're going to file all of these bankruptcy claims and we're not going to tell them. There is even a darker side of that. And since you brought it up, I'm going to bring up the darker side is these mesothelioma lawyers, they know that they are filing like 40 or 50 of these bankruptcy claims. And the reason that they know is because they have their clients sign a declaration. When I worked on this ship, I was exposed to Owens Corning. When I worked on this ship, I was exposed to Babcock and Wilcox boilers. And they have them sign declarations for every single trust, just about, whether they are accurate or not. And they take those declarations and they bury them. They bury them in their file until the solvent case is done. Because when that case is done and all the defendants who are in the case have settled and they haven't had to disclose any of their bankruptcy claims, now they can just, there's no other case because it's settled. They then turn and file those 50 bankruptcy claims after telling all of the defendants, hey, we don't know what claims we're going to file and we haven't filed any yet, when they really know they're about to file about 50 claims. It is a very dark practice that has disturbingly depleted these trust funds, and the ones who loses more than anybody are future victims, because at this point, it's something I've been fighting, is that every future victim of asbestos disease, I don't care what disease it is, meso, lung cancer, asbestosis, they're going to get less money than they deserve from these trust funds, because these mesothelioma advertising national lawyers have depleted these funds, because not only have they deceived the defendants to deplete the funds, but they have also filed dozens and dozens of claims with those trust funds that they control with very shady and suspect evidence. And it's something I've been fighting, but I've just got to move forward. It's been 15 years I've been dealing with it. So
here's a two-part question. This is from Galveston. That's down there by Houston. I'm really enjoying the show. I cannot believe this is the first time I've heard a show like this before. Thank you for bringing this to us. My questions are, one is, are the settlements subject to income tax? And two, what if you don't like the firm that's representing you? Can you change and go to another firm? Ooh, that's a good one.
to answer to question one, income tax, absolutely not. The
Ooh,
check,
okay.
the check that we send you goes right into the bank, and you don't have to pay a penny of income tax on it. And if you want to know why, is because you pay income tax on quote unquote income. And if you look on any tax form, there is a special box that says personal injury settlement. The money that we send you is not income, and it is not subject to income tax. It is a personal injury settlement. And as a result of that, it is not subject to any income tax.
Wow.
Now, the answer to your second question, I remember, is yes, but I don't remember your second question. So give it to me one more time, if you don't mind.
About if you have a law firm representing you that you're not happy with, can you change law firms?
Yes. And I'm going to tell every client out there this. Yes. You know, these firms may intimidate you. Hey, we're going to send you a bill for costs. They can't. You know, we're going to charge you this. We're going to, you know, they make threats. They try and intimidate you. I can't tell you how many calls I get from people who are unhappy with the firm that currently represents them. And I'm not saying I jump to represent every one of those people, because I'm more curious, what are these firms doing that the clients feel is inappropriate? But there are many times that I do talk to them and I say, I am interested in representing you. However, I cannot talk to you while you are represented by another lawyer. And now that you've told me that, part of our ethical duties as lawyers is to not give legal advice to somebody that we know is represented by somebody else, but to tell them, yes, you can switch lawyers. You simply have to terminate your previous lawyer. What I don't want to happen to anyone out there is for you to terminate your previous lawyer, either A, near the end of your case, after it has primarily settled. You may not be happy with it, but there's going to not be a lot that we can do if you've already settled with a number of defendants. We can't get money from those same defendants. That's one thing. Or, you know, if you, I guess, make sure that, you know, as I mentioned to you, these things take time, 18 months maybe before you see money. And clients like to see money, you know, relatively quickly. And in certain situations, when we know clients are going to get settlements, we will advance them part of their settlements. but clients can be sometimes impatient. And just make sure that your lawyer is diligent and has been diligent in filing your case and filing your claims before you switch. I don't want anybody out there to switch lawyers because they may be adequately represented. But yes, you can absolutely switch. Some of the best cases I've represented have fired typically those bigger firms, but those are some of the best cases and clients that I have had.
Michael, can I ask you a talcum powder question?
Of course.
Okay. Well, it says if the original hired law firm did not pursue the talcum powder claim on behalf of a patient, but the patient used talcum powder, what options does that patient have?
It's a good question. I think the first thing for people out there to understand is that the development of a successful lawsuit against typically Johnson & Johnson or other talc defendants, and the reason we can go after them is because that talc was contaminated with asbestos. Okay, so they still have an asbestos disease, and part of their exposure, like maybe this questionnaire, part of their exposure is to talcum powder, Johnson & Johnson. If your case has settled, if your diagnosis was many years ago, chances are there is nothing that can be done. Either your statute of limitations has run against Johnson & Johnson, or you've already filed and settled a case. You've pointed the finger at other defendants, and hopefully there was other solvent defendants to go after. This caller actually brings up something that still bothers me to this day, because back in about 2004, I took in a case of a lady who was about 51 years old, and she was a hairdresser. And at that time, the cases against Johnson & Johnson and the other talc defendants were not fully developed. And I spent, I can't tell you how many weeks, months, years researching and evaluating and trying to find how this lady could have been exposed. And I think the best thing I came up with was, she lived within a certain proximity to Long Beach Naval Shipyard or something, and maybe was by there at times, but really it wasn't a good case. And, from my perspective, it wasn't a successful case at that time. But if that case came into my office today, that's a $20 million, $15 million case against these talc defendants, because the case has, the litigation now has been developed against Johnson & Johnson and Colgate-Palmolive. They made a product, a Cashmere Boutique. And for example, talc was in foot powders as well, Dr. Scholl's and these other foot powders. And, who supplied it, and what were the contaminated mines, and which, lots or years of Johnson & Johnson products had it and which ones didn't. And all of these things weren't developed back in 2003. And so it still bothers me to this day. So for that client, if their case has settled and now they say, God, we could have went after Johnson & Johnson, the law just wasn't developed back then. And now if your statute of limitations is run, your case would get bounced out of court. So it's just an unfortunate thing. And, and I will say on the other side, the lawyers on the other side will just say, hey, we're just going for fruit further up the tree. That writer's case may have involved some of the fruit on the lower end of the tree. For example, companies that made insulation, or products that were in refineries, boilers, or refractory, as we call them, products, or products on ships, or maybe a little higher up the tree, involved maybe drywall or brakes, but maybe never got, as the other defendants will say, we're just going further up the tree, going after talc defendants. The law just wasn't developed until recently against these defendants, and it's only through the very successful efforts of a couple of lawyers in my field. Where here I have been somewhat critical of some of the lawyers in my field, there are some lawyers who are spectacular, and two who I do want to name: Mark Lanier, Texas, Chris Panettiere, Panettiere. If people don't know these two lawyers, if you do just a little bit of research, you will see that not only are they great lawyers, they're great people. Chris Panettiere is also an author as well. These guys are some great lawyers, and without them, they've really paved the way for the rest of us to go after Johnson & Johnson.
Michael, how do people get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me. They can text me. I'm gonna start there. 415-307-2119. 415-307-2119. My website, Mandelbrot, my last name, people will know it as the mathematical theorem, the Mandelbrot theorem, or the almond cookie, the Mandelbrot, Mandelbrot at asbestoslegalcenter.org, or mesothelioma.pro is actually my website. And 1-800-970-DUST. I know you got to get going. Is my 800 number. Thanks, Steve.
Michael, great show. Good questions. Thank you. All the people who sent questions in. The good thing is Michael's going to be back again with us next month, and we're going to be replaying the show next week. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Steve. Great chatting. Thanks, everyone out there. Bye-bye.
And that's attorney Michael Mandelbrot. Hey, that's it for us today. We'll be back again with you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Experts show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.